Born, abandoned, and treated like an animal, Woo-Jin hates the world and lives a lonely life, unable to trust anyone. Then, on January 1st, 2020, the world changed. Dungeons appeared around the world, and mass death and destruction followed at the hands of the monsters that poured out. Not all hope was lost, however, as divine beings known as the Nimbus appeared and granted some people special power called authority. Those who received such power were able to become players and clear dungeons. But rather than using their special power to save the world, players instead used their power to fulfill their own desires. The world despaired, but to Woo-Jin, it was the same life he had already been living. Nobody could be trusted. His thoughts finally changed when he met Se-Jun Lee, the world's first and strongest player. Se-Jun protected people from monsters without expecting anything in return, and sought to save the world by killing the ultimate monster, the final boss. In order to achieve his goal, Se-Jun created the Messiah Guild and welcomed Woo-Jin. He was finally able to find people he could trust. But then, before the gates of the final boss battle, Se-Jun turns on Woo-Jin and stabs him. They tell him that when the game ends and they defeat the final boss, all of the items and powers players have accumulated will disappear as well. If they lost their power, Messiah and players would also lose their status and be unable to achieve their true hidden goal of ruling the world. Many of the companions and friends Woo-Jin lost in their battles to get to the final boss were disposed of by Se-Jun and Shin-Hye, the leaders of the Messiah Guild. In the end, Woo-Jin died to the ones he believed he could trust. Woo-Jin wakes up in a transport truck while the people around him talk about the rewards they're going to gain from killing monsters. He definitely just died and doesn't have much time to orient himself before the truck stops in front of a swarm of orcs and they're ordered to attack. Their leader tells them that they're low on bullets and to hold fire until they're certain that they can hit the orcs, but Woo-Jin ignores him and instantly shoots an orc in the head with his rifle. The orcs charge him, and Woo-Jin puts on a masterful display as he dodges their attacks and kills the other members of the orc swarm. It's all too real to be a dream, so he must really be in the past. Their commander tries to berate him for being reckless, but Woo-Jin ignores him and walks away as he recalls Se-Jun and Shin-Hye betraying him. Suddenly, Woo-Jin awakens as a player and is presented with 3 class options compared to the 2 he had in the past. The new option, Agent of the Dark World, can control poisons, curses, and the undead. Since the Nimbus that grants the Agent of the Dark World authority is selective, just one player was able to monopolize most of the authority in the past, John George, who was known as the King of the Undead. As the one who hunted George, Woo-Jin has more knowledge of the Agent of the Dark World authority than anyone else, and he intends to pick the authority and use what he knows to hunt down Se-Jun and take his revenge. Among Korea's guilds, the Phoenix Guild managed to climb up to 2nd place with a reputation for unfair methods. It was thanks to them that the Messiah Guild became even more popular. Knowing this, Woo-Jin joins the Phoenix Guild for a paltry amount. To confirm he's a player, the guild recruiter places skill pages for Agent of the Dark World on the table between them and tells him to rip or learn one of the skills. Woo-Jin picks Poison Blood, a simple skill that lets the caster turn his blood into a deadly poison. While the skill itself is simple, when combined with the Blood Golem skill, the result becomes extremely effective. In a flashback, we find out from his allies' gossip that Woo-Jin was picked as a hound due to his dog-like temperament. He remembers his partners from back then and believes he'll likely be able to meet them soon since they would still be alive at this point. In a parking garage, a somewhat experienced hunter by the name of Ju Sob reassures the newer hunters as they wait for Woo-Jin, who shows up later than the rest. They ridicule his attitude and equipment and decide not to pay him any attention, excluding him from their conversation as they all head toward the briefing room. They'll be entering an E-rank goblin dungeon, and Woo-Jin takes a look around to see that he doesn't recognize anyone else in the party. That will make his plan even easier. Within the dungeon, they find a forest area. Woo-Jin sees signs of goblins shortly before the party leader tells him to scout the area. Since the party leader knows scouting is the most dangerous and it gets Woo-Jin away from his group, he believes it's a win-win situation where even if Woo-Jin survives, the rest of the party can monopolize the rewards. This is all as Woo-Jin already predicted. In the Messiah Guild, Shin-Hye introduces a new member to be in charge of one of their operations. Suzuki Eiichi walks into the room and forgoes introductions because he already recognizes many in the room. Se-Jun greets him back, and when he continues to speak in a casual manner, one of the guild's council members, Ji-Hoo, takes offense and questions Se-Jun's decision to bring Suzuki here. It appears that Suzuki and Ji-Hoo have some sort of past grudge against each other, but Se-Jun silences them so that Shin-Hye can continue speaking of the operation. When questioned about how much longer they should wait, Suzuki states that he only needs 3 more days to find the specific material location. Back in the Goblin Dungeon, Woo-Jin rests his hand upon a gash on a tree trunk and recalls rumors about the dungeon and how Suzuki Eiichi taught him most of what he knows. Goblins attack, and Woo-Jin uses them to test his Poison Blood skill. He cuts himself, coating his dagger in his poison blood, and uses it to stab a goblin. Unfortunately, the skill doesn't seem to be very effective at the moment. Still, they're just goblins, and Woo-Jin is confident that he can deal with them. Before they can gather and swarm him, Woo-Jin pulls out an item he had prepared beforehand, the Goblin Chief's whip, and snaps it, making the goblins tremble in fear. Goblins swarm the rest of Woo-Jin's party, and Ju-Sub boosts their morale by cutting one down before his sword gets stuck in the goblin's body and he gets injured. He begs the other party members for help and they charge in. Meanwhile, Woo-Jin finishes off the goblins near him and receives notice from the agent of the Dark World. The party managed to save Ju-Sub from the goblins but took heavy injuries in the process. They believe Woo-Jin is probably dead and start to blame Ju-Sub now that they've realized the extra party member would have helped them. Monster yells sound from a distance, and the party gets ready for another wave. Woo-Jin kills more goblins and receives the Skeleton Soldier ability from the agent of the Dark World. George, the king of the undead, had previously used the skill to great effect. As the one who hunted George, Woo-Jin realizes the skill's greatest weakness is that only monsters killed by the caster could be used in the skill. Still, using the skill as a distraction will allow Woo-Jin to more easily hunt other monsters. He uses the skill on one of the dead goblins and creates a fierce-eyed goblin skeleton to do his bidding. The goblin skeleton proves to be a bit weak when he tests it near a tree decorated with the corpses of dead players. Woo-Jin's methods against the monsters might seem brutal at times, but the monsters have never shown any sort of mercy towards humans, so he only treats them in kind. Ju-Sub and the others hide within a cave and lament their fate, believing they might die to the goblins, when he receives a level up message above his head. Since the only way to level up when not doing anything is for another party member to still be in combat, they realize Woo-Jin must still be alive and fighting. Woo-Jin kills an entire horde of goblins in the cave by smoking them out and burning them to death against a wooden barricade at the cave entrance. He holds no regard or care for the other players, and the agent of the Dark World becomes satisfied with his method. As if in response to killing the other goblins, a goblin champion bursts from the ground and prepares to attack him. The main killer of the dungeon, the goblin champion was a monster that the Messiah Guild defeated in Woo-Jin's memories of the future. Most people believe the dungeon to be a starter dungeon and aren't prepared for such an enemy. Woo-Jin prepares his sword, and his goblin skeleton sees it and walks forward, ready to prove itself. Seeing the look in the skeleton's void-like eyes, Woo-Jin hands it the sword and watches it use his own techniques from the future to attack the goblin champion's legs as it mimics his combat style. Before he returned to the past, Woo-Jin was a master of all kinds of weapons, and there was nobody even in the Messiah Guild who could go against him in a direct one-on-one fight, so the soldiers inheriting his combat style changes everything. The skeleton finishes off the goblin champion, and Woo-Jin receives a legendary skill page from the agent of the Dark World as a gift for his achievement. With that, the dungeon is cleared in only a day, and Woo-Jin leaves the portal shortly after the other players, leaving everyone wondering who he really is to have cleared the dungeon alone. In a bar somewhere in town, Ju-Sub watches the news play stories about the heroics of Se-Jun and the Messiah Guild, while also criticizing the majority of players for their greed and constant demands. Sick of it, Ju-Sub looks away from the news on his phone and speaks with someone else in the bar. Instead of telling the truth, he blames Woo-Jin for his injuries and tries to indirectly take credit for clearing the dungeon. The other person takes him at his word and promises to spread news around so that Woo-Jin won't be able to do something like that again. We then see Woo-Jin planning out his strategy to gain a specific person's attention. If his plan is to work, he needs to start from the end and work his way up. With that in mind, he goes to the guild the next day and asks to go into the Orc Hunter dungeon. When he's warned about being greedy and told to value his own life, Woo-Jin shuts him down and tells him just to tell him when he can do it. He also finds out about the rumors being spread, but they're actually a help to him because they're a good pretext for him doing things on his own. Believing the rumors about Woo-Jin to be true, the man gets more information that the dungeon Woo-Jin wants to clear caused even a rising star of the Phoenix Guild to die. He's led to the dungeon entrance by an attendant and enters the dungeon to see a dark, rocky landscape. An orc attacks him just after he draws his sword, and Woo-Jin plans to use its body to summon a skeleton soldier. However, he needs to actually kill it first. Its skin is thick, and even a single blow is enough to kill him. The two of them fight again, and Woo-Jin manages to dodge all of its attacks while repeatedly cutting its legs until it collapses, and he finishes it off. In the end, he's able to summon his orc skeleton soldier. A man looks over a report and speaks with his subordinate about Woo-Jin clearing a dungeon by himself and going so far as to enter a second dungeon by himself just after awakening. The subordinate questions the authenticity of the story and whether or not the man is just gullible, which ends up being an indirect insult to Secretary Lee's abilities. The subordinate quickly goes back on what he said, claiming that the report is perfect. Just as he compliments her information gathering skills, the man suddenly yells about being given instant coffee, and Secretary Lee explains that she took it from the Phoenix Guild's meeting and made the report with reusable paper. A Scrooge when it comes to money, the man quickly changes his attitude and praises her again. They're trying to purchase the dungeons, and the man wants his subordinate to enter a dungeon soon after finishing one just the day before. Woo-Jin's skeleton orc falls to a regular orc. He sees that they're a bit weak, but he still has tricks up his sleeve. As long as he has mana, he can summon more soldiers from the corpses. He levels up again and receives an increase in ability points, as well as having his poison blood hit rank 2. The orcs aren't a great source of experience for him, so Woo-Jin tries to figure out where he can find the orc hunter. Since the monster doesn't lead a pack or hang out in a group, Woo-Jin narrows it down to one location. Out of sacrifices to use for skeleton soldiers, he only has the one already summoned to help him take down the orc hunter, who is shown dragging a dead orc somewhere. Woo-Jin coats an arrow in his poison blood and prepares to enact his plan. He sends the skeleton orc in first and verifies the bloody red eyes of the orc hunter as it clashes with the skeleton orc. The orc hunter's skin is too tough to be pierced with his arrow, but Woo-Jin is able to accurately hit its eye during its grapple with the skeleton orc and affect it with his poison blood. While level 2 of poison blood isn't enough to outright kill the orc, and only has some effect in decreasing the orc hunter's health, the pain it causes is enough to cripple the hunter's combat ability and allow the skeleton orc to kill it. He managed to clear the dungeon, but before he leaves, he notices the remains of a player in a pile with an injury that could have only been caused by another player. It's possible that someone in the Phoenix Guild killed the player. Exploring the area, he finds an undamaged player skeleton huddled in a cave with a clean sword. Judging by the tally marks on the wall, the player escaped while this party was being killed and counted the days until he died on the wall. As it turns out, the rising star of Yongwen Park's faction of the Phoenix Guild was really a coward. Woo-Jin finds a diary on the ground that contains Yongwen Park's faction's blacklist. With the blacklist, Woo-Jin's plans will only be accelerated, and it'll serve as the perfect tool for making use of the Phoenix Guild. We hope you enjoyed the story so far. Check out Kill the Hero to find out what scheme Woo-Jin comes up with next.